On February 17, 2025, something happened in Russia that, honestly, no one can really explain. A chemical factory 1,600 kilometers from Ukraine caught fire. The drones that caused this crossed hundreds of kilometers of Russian air defenses, reached their destination, and delivered their explosives with surgical precision. Russia, said it shot down the drones, but the photos of the fire told a different story. But this video isn't about that attack. What I'm going to show you here is the weapon that may have made that attack possible, a weapon that no one is taking seriously enough, a weapon that Russia, with its entire arsenal of hypersonic missiles and state-of-the-art air defense systems, can't stop without spending a fortune. Just so you have an idea, this weapon is 200 years old, and that's exactly why it works. And no, I'm not talking about drones. They have their role, but they're not perfect. Look, when you launch a drone towards Russia, it has to cross a huge barrier of radars and missiles, which gets tighter as it gets closer to important targets. Missiles and radars monitor the airspace. Electronic systems try to block the GPS signal and disrupt navigation, and missiles wait for the right moment to intercept. The success rate is actually quite reasonable for targets nearer the border. Now, for targets 1,600 kilometers deep inside Russia, the logic changes completely. The defense gets denser, the drone needs more power, and every extra kilometer is a new chance for the Russian system to intercept it. But this is where the story changed completely. Why? The Ukrainian solution to this problem is so simple that it sounds absurd when you hear it for the first time. Instead of trying to make the drone cross all that defended space on its own, you put the drone inside a balloon. The balloon rises to an altitude where the radars can barely see it. The winds, which naturally blow from Eastern Europe towards Russia, carry the balloon for hundreds of kilometers, without using fuel and without emitting the slightest electronic signal. When the balloon is close enough to the target, it releases the drone covers the final stretch, and the factory catches fire. There is a Ukrainian company called Aerobavovna that is already producing and selling this type of system to the Ukrainian army. Their balloons go up, transmit real-time images, and carry drones into Russian territory. This isn't theory, it's what's happening right now. While you're watching this video and want to know why this is a serious problem for Russia, let me show you how a radar works. Look, one of these modern radars is made to detect objects that clearly appear on the screen: metals, dense materials, engines generating heat, fast-moving objects. Think of it this way. The more an object stands out on the radar, the brighter it appears on the operator's monitor. A fighter jet shows up like a fireball. A military drone appears smaller but still visible. Now a thin plastic balloon with no metal parts, no engine, floating slowly at high altitude practically doesn't show up. For many radars, it's indistinguishable from a large bird, a cloud, or simply regular interference. And there's a second problem. Military radars are programmed to ignore objects that move too slowly to be a threat. And if you stop to think about it, that makes sense. Without that filter, any cloud, any flock of birds, any leaf carried by the wind would set off alarms all the time. A balloon moves at the speed of the wind, and in most cases it's simply ignored. Plus, there's the altitude. Ukrainian military balloons can go higher than fighter jets, and in some cases, higher than the range of several air defense systems. Russia doesn't currently have a viable answer to dozens or hundreds of balloons at the same time, at high altitude, each carrying a smaller drone underneath. Do you remember the 200-year-old weapon I mentioned earlier? I haven't gotten to it yet. To really understand this weapon, you need to know a story that happened 80 years ago and that most people have never heard of. It's November 1944. Japan is losing the war, and there's no way to reach the United States with bombers. Their submarines have been driven away from the American coast. and their aircraft carriers are at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. In a moment of creative desperation, Japanese military engineers looked to the sky and realized something that few had considered as a weapon: a current of very strong winds that blows at high altitude from west to east, crossing the Pacific.
Essa corrente de ventos, que hoje chamamos de corrente de jato, sopra em velocidades de até 320 km por hora.
Throughout the entire journey, about 300 reached the American continent and were found from Alaska to Mexico. The American Army was genuinely concerned. There was a weapon capable of crossing continents at a very low cost, completely autonomous, impossible to stop on a large scale. The American government made a decision that seems obvious in retrospect, but was extraordinarily effective. They censored all the press, no newspaper, no radio, no public mention of the balloons. The silence was total. On the other side of the Pacific, Japanese engineers listened to American radio broadcasts, waiting for news of fires, panic, destruction, and they heard nothing. They concluded that the balloons were falling into the ocean before arriving. The program was terminated in April of 1945, just a few weeks before a family in Oregon discovered the opposite in the worst possible way. On May 5, 1945, Reverend Artie Michel took his pregnant wife and 5 children from his Sunday school for a picnic in an Oregon forest. The children found a strange object by the edge of a creek. Before the Reverend could shout a warning, the balloon exploded. Elsie Mitchell and the 5 children, aged between 11 and 14, died. They were the only civilian victims of enemy action on the continental United States during the entire Second World War. The Fugo was considered a military failure at the time. But if we look more closely, it was something much more disturbing. Proof that it is possible to attack an enemy 9,000 kilometers away with very low-cost technology, without planes, without missiles, without even a supply line. What ended the program was not American defense, it was American silence. And here is the difference, which changes everything when you compare Japan in 1944 with Ukraine today. Ukraine does not keep secrets about its successes. Every successful attack is published, publicized, spread. The psychological impact is part of the strategy. Putin built the narrative that Ukraine is a collapsing country, incapable of reaching the heart of Russia. Each fire in a factory 1,700 kilometers from the border destroys that narrative in real time. In the eyes of the Russian population itself, Japan lost because it remained silent. Ukraine learned from that mistake and does the opposite. But the problem Russia faces goes beyond psychology, it's financial, and it's much more serious than it appears on the surface. The truth is that Russia has experience with military balloons. During the Cold War, it even created specialized aircraft to shoot down American spy balloons. But that experience was built for large, slow balloons that stayed in the air for weeks, collecting information. Today's Ukrainian balloons are something completely different. They're small, they're cheap, they can be launched by the dozens or hundreds at the same time, and instead of carrying cameras, they carry drones. It's like saying you know how to swim and thinking that prepares you for a storm. Now imagine this. You have a sidewalk to protect and your neighbor starts throwing pebbles at your window. You buy a sophisticated defense system which costs thousands of dollars for each stone it stops, and your neighbor has a bucket full of pebbles that cost $10 in total. Who breaks first? That's exactly what's happening. And yes, balloons depend on the wind and take days to arrive. They're not precision weapons, but it's exactly this unpredictability that makes defense impossible to plan. You can't program a radar to intercept the wind. To shoot down a balloon with a Russian missile, the cost is $1 to $2 million per shot. A Ukrainian balloon costs a few $100s to build. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies in the United States, every time Russia uses one of these missiles against a cheap object, it's burning money at a ratio of 1 to 5,000 or worse. When you multiply that by hundreds of situations over months, you start to understand why countries with sophisticated defenses lose wars of attrition against enemies with cheap weapons. And the Russian air defense systems are already overwhelmed, even before considering the balloons. In 2025, Russia even claimed that it shot down 334 drones in just 24 hours. And as you can imagine, each interception uses up ammunition. Each missile used against a cheap drone is a missile that can't be used against a real target. The balloons add a new layer to all of this, operating at different altitudes and speeds, requiring Russia to cover an even larger area with the same resources that are already stretched to the limit. And there's an even bigger problem, maybe the most important of all. Look, Russia can, in theory, solve the problem of regular drones. It's expensive, it requires a lot of industrial effort, but there is a solution. They can produce more interceptors, build more layers of defense, cover more territory. It's a classic arms race where the bigger one can eventually win by sheer volume. But against balloons, there is no such solution. To truly cover Russian airspace against slow objects, almost invisible to radar, that fly very high and are launched in large numbers, you would need a huge network of special radars covering the entire territory, plus patrol planes flying around the clock, and an entirely new rapid response system for this specific type of threat. This would require tens of billions of dollars, years of work, and a complete transformation of the entire Russian air defense. All of this while the war continues, while the economy is under pressure from sanctions, and while Ukraine keeps attacking. Exactly the factories that would produce the equipment needed for this protection. It's a cruel paradox. To defend itself from the balloons, Russia needs factories that the balloons are destroying. The Metafrax factory in Gubaka, for example, was one of the largest producers of chemical substances in Russia. Without these substances, Russian missiles and explosives simply don't exist. It's an irreplaceable piece in the production chain. And ironically, it wasn't international sanctions that stopped these factories. It was a balloon. And this raises an intriguing question. After all, why was a factory banned by the entire world still operating normally until the moment it was physically destroyed? The answer is, at the very least, uncomfortable. Why? Sanctions do create difficulties, increase costs, and force adaptations, but they don't destroy physical capacity. A banned factory can still produce if it finds alternative suppliers, parallel import routes, and buyers willing to turn a blind eye. And Russia, after 3 years of war and forced adaptation, has gotten very good at finding these alternatives. Now, a drone inside a balloon has no alternatives. It either arrives or it doesn't, and when it does, the damage is physical, immediate, and irreversible. In September 2025, during a massive attack on Moscow and Tatarstan, sources within the Russian Ministry of Defense itself admitted for the first time the large-scale use of Ukrainian balloons. The statement was revealing, not because of what it said, but because of what the official report from that day omitted. It counted the drones that were shot down. It didn't mention any balloons. The pattern is always the same. Acknowledge the threat internally, deny it publicly, wait for the issue to blow over, but the issue doesn't go away because the balloons keep coming. The Ukrainian unit responsible for approximately 90% of all attacks inside Russia is called the First Separate Center for Unmanned Systems. Its commander, identified by the codename Charlie, said in a rare interview that the unit's operations grew dozens of times in 2025. This is not just talk for the press. It's the description of a force that learned, tested, made mistakes, adjusted, and grew over years of real war. A force that right now, while you're watching this video, is planning the next attack. And while the factories burn and the balloons rise, there's a question that the next few months will answer: how far can these balloons go? In February 2025, the Ukrainian record was 1,750 kilometers, with the attack on the Ukhta refinery in the Komi Republic. The attack on Metafrax was just below that. Both show a Ukraine that is increasingly comfortable attacking targets that Putin had dismissed as untouchable. If the balloons are helping to extend that range, as seems to be the case, then Ukraine's limit is no longer the distance a drone can fly, it's the distance the wind can carry them, and the winds, as any Ukrainian knows, blow to the east. Now I want to know your opinion. Do you believe that balloons can make a big difference in the war? Leave your answer in the comments. If this video made you see this war from a different angle, share it with someone who is following the conflict. If you haven't subscribed yet, the button's right there. We keep breaking down what's behind the headlines. See you next time.